Alrighty guys, welcome back to Sad Labs today. It's Sad Labs. So for anyone that watched my Matsuri expedition, you would know that I'd been to yet another turbo. After all that, on the weekend, I sort of really had the shits big time and sort of chucked the tanty, and I was telling everyone I was just going to go to high mount because I was sick of the low mount. Rah, rah, rah. Yeah, I do that. Was not a very happy boy, but pretty much what I've come to is before I go making any of those decisions, I'm really going to try and investigate what it is that's actually killing these turbos, because it should not be happening. Even having the cast low mount manifold, which would be less flow than a high mount, but the way that this is set up with the size turbo and the external gate, it shouldn't be that bad. It should still be able to flow plenty adequately for what I'm trying to do. There are plenty of people out there that are making big horsepower with this manifold, with the standard VL turbo low mount. There are people out there with GT35 82s that are making well over sort of 500 wheel horsepower on this manifold and running deep under 10 seconds on the quarter with this sort of manifold setup. So I am not under the idea or the impression that it is simply just the low mount that is the problem. I refuse to believe that it could just be the low mount that is the issue here. So I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of research, as I do, trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And I sort of have come to a bit of an idea that I reckon it could potentially be my timing. So when I put this motor together, when I threw it all together, I threw it in the car with the old ECU and the old tune file for the old setup, which was for a high mount. At the time, it was much smaller turbo. I didn't have the time to get this to my tuner to get it cleaned up. So as you all know, I sort of was pretty generous with retarding the timing. I put the AFR gauge in it so that I could keep an eye on my AFRs, and I made it a little bit fat. Like I just made it a little bit rich and pretty retarded just to try and save essentially this motor from pinging, all that sort of stuff, because it hadn't been tuned properly for the setup that was on it. So the issue that presents with your exhaust gas temps is the fact that if you retard too much, your combustion is happening so late in the cycle that you are blowing like so much of your combustion heat just straight out in the exhaust stroke, which does cause massive EGTs, which obviously you don't potentially really see on your AFR. So as much as the AFR is still saying that it is safe as far as my air fuel mixture, because of my overly retarded timing, it could be causing massive EGTs, which I am having. As you all know, this thing, the exhaust side, the hot side on this thing just gets so ridiculously hot. You watch videos from Archie, it's like glowing white. This thing, the exhaust side gets hot. And I continue to put that down, or have continued to put that down to the fact that it's a cast manifold. I kept saying, oh, you know, it's a cast manifold. It's just what they do. But it really shouldn't be getting that hot. So it does make sense that having my timing too retarded is causing massive EGTs, which consequently, would be causing the exhaust wheel of these turbos to just get way too hot, and that shaft to be getting way too hot, which would make sense that, you know, the first one bent a shaft, and the second one has snapped the exhaust wheel off at the shaft. So that's sort of where I'm at with it. So having this turbine wheel being that hot and having the shaft that hot, I then think probably the dose is a contributing factor, the surge. So you got your surge coming back on the compressor wheel while the shaft is that hot that it's malleable. You know, it's only got to move enough to contact one of the housings and you will snap an exhaust wheel or bend a shaft. So it all does make sense. And I mean, the fact is your retarded timing is going to blow out flame, which, as you saw from my lead up to Matsuri, this thing was blowing flames, which is, you know, cool, but probably not too cool when you're actually bouncing off a limiter at QR and it's causing massive EGTs. So it all does make sense for this to be the problem. That being said, I believe that this low mount setup can still work, so I'm determined to try and figure out whether I'm correct and try and get this thing sorted properly. So I've been trying to get onto my tuner just to get a second opinion on my sort of theory and what I've researched and what I think is happening. He is a very elusive and busy man. I have not been able to get hold of him thus far. So what I've mustered up on where to go from here is that off V80, when we went to the 2867s, we pulled the two China 3582s off. So those turbos are T3 flange, 4-bolt dump, pretty much will bolt straight onto this setup. Now, Rex the other day for me looked up on the Garrett website what a Garrett 3076 with a .84 AR rear versus a Garrett 3582 with a 0.64, I think they are, AR rear, and the compressor maps are almost identical. So although the 3582 is a bit big, because it's got a tiny rear housing on it, it shouldn't be too much different to the 3076 that I've got on there. So the fact that it's gonna cost me nothing to do totally outweighs any disadvantages of having the bigger turbo. So my plan at this stage is to get a 3582 onto this thing, onto the low mount, get it all back together. And from then I am going to take it straight down to my tuner and get it tuned properly for the setup, get it timed correctly. And that way I can rule out that idea that may be causing this problem. So once it's tuned correctly, hopefully it's not so retarded that it's creating massive EGTs, and hopefully after that, if it keeps that turbo alive for a few events, and I'm pretty confident that it's going to keep that alive, I'll look at buying into another 3076 or something along those lines. Obviously if the 3582 is fine and it suits driving and it's doing everything properly, I won't bother changing it, but ideally a 3076 is a better size, but yeah, like I said, we'll just take it as it comes. Either way, at this stage, I don't want to go investing any more money into the hot side setup until I know it's going to keep turbos alive, and that is a way that I can make sure it's going to keep turbos alive where it's not going to cost me anything. So that is the plan. So what I have figured is, obviously, you saw at Matsuri, the blow-by is starting to get quite severe. So the first thing I'm going to do is a comp test on this motor, make sure it comes back pretty well. As you all are aware, a little blow-by doesn't really scare me at all. I really do punish this motor. I don't mind that it has a fair bit of blow-by and the rings that are pretty, sloppy. Doesn't particularly bother me that much. But the fact is, if I've got to pull this motor out to re-ring it, I was like, oh, if I've got to pull it out to re-ring it, I may as well put a decent head gasket back in it and put head studs back in it. And then if I'm going to go to high mount down the road, and then after I go 25 box, that's already all done, so I can just, it's already there. So after that, it'd be ready for sort of that 400 horsepower. And at the end of the day, the fact is I just don't particularly have the funds to throw at that this year. And I would like to get it fixed, at least to continue to drive a few times this year, maybe. So if I can get it working with the low mount, that at least lets me drive for sort of the rest of the year, and then I can look at re-ringing it later. But I'll do a comp test on it. That's going to be first thing, and make sure it comes back okay. As long as it's not dropped a considerable amount and it's even, well then it'll be game on for just try the 3582 on the low mount. So the other thing with having the low mount on is that I'm sure that it probably changes what the motor needs for certain maps and that sort of thing. Obviously it is map tuned. Having the extra back pressure, because it would be making more back pressure, I just don't believe that it would be detrimental to the setup. But that extra back pressure I'm sure will change the tune quite a bit. So I think there's just a few things working here where it's too retarded, it's a bit too rich, so it's causing massive EGTs, and it's just the tune's off, which would be playing against me. And obviously these turbos are cheap, they're not super well built. At the same time, I think they should be living for longer than they are. So I just need to try and get it to keep one alive. So anyway, in my head, all of the way this car's been behaving, it all points towards that this could be correct, what I'm onto. Hopefully the way I've explained it has made just as much sense to you guys. But either way, first thing I've got to do is make sure this thing's still got good compression. Alright, so we're nearly at operating temp. Nearly ready to pull these plugs out and do a comp test. So you can see where the blow-by is getting pretty bad out of that catch can. Obviously the fact that it's dirty, you can't hide any sins when it's dirty. It really shows it all up. And I've checked that catch can, it's about half full. So that I emptied that before Matsuri. So those however many laps I did at Matsuri, that catch can is about half full. Alright, I got the good oil compression tester. As you can see, it's all the same gear that I used the last time, which is good because it means that it's a good point of reference, because obviously Compression gauges can vary. A lot of things can vary. So the more variables you can take out of doing your comp test using the same gear, try and make it the same temperature, all the rest of that, the better off you're going to be as far as referencing your compression test. So you can see here we're about 112, which is exactly what it was last time, so it's a good start. Alright, so this is the lowest one of all 6, which is number 6, which is just over 100 there. What do we got there? Probably about 105, I think that is. 107, 105 to 107-ish. The rest of them were all, I even did number 2 as well. Number 2 and 5, just like number 5 last time, was just a little bit under, about 110. And the rest were all about 112 psi. So it hasn't dropped really any compression from last time. So it's not really gotten any worse. Obviously it's still not that great. Again, it's those rings in this motor. It's just the way they are. It's not going to hurt it. It's just going to be a little bit blow-by-ish. So my other concerns about the blow-by causing crankcase pressure, which could be causing issues with the turbo drain. Again, it's one of those things where the thing is breathing quite well. As you can see, the catch can is sort of filling up. It's got blow-by, but it doesn't seem to be choked up at all. It's pretty free breathing, as you can see from all the blow-by. So, although again, it could be one of those contributing factors, I don't believe, again, it's something that should be that detrimental. So, I do believe I'm onto something with the EGTs being too high. So from here, compression's pretty good. That means if I can get this thing sorted with the 35 and get it retuned so that it's gonna, drive for the rest of the year, then I'll be stoked with it. So I'll continue to drive it like that for a little while, until I can afford to do, the rings and the head gasket and the studs as well. Until then, I won't bother pulling the motor out because it seems to be healthy enough. So I'll chuck the plugs back in. The next thing I do want to check is the oil feed for the turbo. So what I'm going to do there is pull the drain off the block and set up a bit of a catch dish sort of thing and get the car running, and just see how much oil actually comes through the feed and through the turbo in X amount of time. Although it's pretty hard with RBs because they just generally make low oil pressure at idle. This thing, even at operating temp, will idle at about 15 psi of oil pressure, so don't expect there to be, gushing as much you'd expect, say a JZ or an LS or something to come out of a turbo feed, because it just doesn't have the oil pressure that a lot of those motors do. But at least it's going to tell the story of whether oil is actually flowing pretty freely through that turbo and getting to those bearings. So that's going to be the next thing. So I just started getting the car off the ground on the hoist and noticed this. I didn't even notice it before. And it is coming out of the turbo. Unsure what that is. I'd say probably when the wheel broke off, it might have done some damage to the seal in the rear there. I'll know more when I get this turbo off. But anyway. Righto, so I've set up my little water bottle catch on the turbo drain. That is a 1.25 litre bottle. So from everyone that I've sort of researched and talked to, should be looking at about 500 mil every 15 seconds. Again, I'm not particularly sure that an RB is going to be very accurate in that, especially one with a cooked turbo, because if it did shit that rear bearing, well then it's not going to get much oil flow through that bearing. So probably not the best story to tell, but at least I'll know whether there is like a real severe blockage in any case. So I'll start it up and see how it goes. So that was 15 seconds, which is not much at all. That's not very good. So that there is a minute. And that's this thing running about 15 psi of oil pressure. And that's what's coming out of the drain. Alrighty, so I'm convinced that that is not enough oil flow. The restrictor in this turbo is actually in the turbo housing. So what I'm gonna do now is take the feed off the top and do the same test just with the feed. Obviously, there's no risk of me hurting this turbo because it's rooted. So anyway, I'm going to do it with the feed. That'll at least tell me whether it's some sort of restriction in the turbo, or if there's actually a problem with the feed. Righto, so that was 50 seconds. I didn't want to leave it too much longer because the bottle would have fallen over. But as you can see from the feed, a lot more oil. So probably a lot more desirable amount of oil flow. Probably would be better off taking the restrictor out of this turbo, I would say. So probably the next one I will try not running a restrictor in it. So obviously the only thing that's going to happen by not running a restrictor is you potentially may push oil out the seals, which means you're either going to get a little bit of upper cylinder lubricant on the intake side and burn a bit of oil on the exhaust side. So either one, neither really as bad as potentially blowing up another turbo. So definitely try probably no restrictor on the next one and see how that goes, along with my trying to bring my EGTs back down. So that being said, this turbo hasn't really been touched since it was on the old setup. So it has been running this restrictor previously. That is the restrictor it was running when it used to be on this car. But next one I'm going to try no restrictor. So that's pretty much all the tests I wanted to do before getting this hot side off. So it's now time to pull this hot side back out and pull this turbo off and have a good look at it, I suppose. I'll tell you what, for someone who tried to build this so that they would never have to take this hot side off, I've sure had to take this hot side off a lot of times. Righto, so I got the turbo off, pulled the feed off and had a look. As you can see down there, that's the restrictor that is in the turbo. Has been there for ever, as far as I'm aware. It was never taken out. It was run like that the last time it was on the car. But I also noticed, because I was looking real close at the feed and everything when I took it off to make sure there was no blockages and nothing had blocked the oil path. But it looks like the Kinagawa feed fitting is a restrictor in itself, which would make sense for them to have that as a restriction. So yeah, don't know if that might have come into a fair bit of play with everything. Being obviously that even looks like a smaller restriction than that there. So I'm not sure that that would have mattered much, but obviously this is a kit for a ball bearing turbo. So it would make sense for this feed to be a restriction. So that could have been a very big issue with it all. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind, I suppose. I'll get some more opinions on that as well. But that looks very, very smart to me. Apart from that, the only obvious thing pulling it apart was that this actually wasn't very tight. It was quite loose. So that had worked its way a bit loose somehow. Apart from that, the housing all looks to be okay. So anyway, I'm going to now try and get the exhaust housing off, get the wheel off, and just have a better look at the back of the housing and see what's going on in there. Alrighty, so I've got this rear housing off. As you can see, the wheel is absolute toast. Doesn't get much worse. It's pretty bad. That's definitely one for the wall of shame. But what I do find odd, so you can see how badly that is. Just folded every fin, just absolutely cactus. So a bit strange. What I do find odd is the fact that you can see here it's snapped right on the back of that bearing. But that bearing looks fine. And what's left of the shaft and the compressor wheel, there's hardly any play in it. It spins fine. It's not bent or anything. It's literally just sheared the rear wheel off there. So generally in my experience, every turbo that I've pulled down that has this sort of failure, the bearing has cracked first. Usually it's the bearing cracks, starves it of oil, and then it gets real hot and snaps a wheel off, usually due to enough play that it can contact the housing. So the fact that that bearing seems fine is a little bit odd to me for where that's snapped. It almost does seem like something's gone through the exhaust housing and made contact with the turbine wheel for it to do that, but not do damage to that bearing. It's a bit strange, but it's one of those things where I won't know for sure until I get this turbo completely apart. And obviously I've got two turbos there that have failed that I can pull down and inspect and see what's gone wrong. But it is quite strange. That wheel is absolutely cooked. And you can see there's that little piece sticking up there. I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, very odd. Very strange. Anyway, guys, that's going to be today's efforts. Got done what I wanted to get done today, really. So next episode is going to be pulling down this turbo and the other turbo and taking a very good inspection at what has gone wrong. See if we can try and narrow it down to something, because it really seems odd. If that restrictor was restricting too much oil, I reckon that bearing should be not very good. If it was getting that hot on the shaft that the exhaust wheel could just break off at the shaft, I'd imagine that bearing wouldn't be very good either. Yeah, bit strange. Again, won't know till I pull it down, but that's going to be next episode. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Hopefully we can get to the bottom of this, because if we get all this apart and we haven't learned anything, I'm going to be livid. So look forward to seeing you in the next one. Keep an eye out for it, and I'll see you then. Catch you later.